I am live. Yes, I am alive. Working on some other projects mostly today. Brewing some mead. I may have gotten my initial mix a little off. So it's likely to be a very dry mead. But since I hope to back sweeten it anyway, it'll probably turn out all right. The trick is, if I back sweeten it, it might kick it off again. If it kicks off again, it might go to a very high alcohol content. Such is the fun experiment of brewing mead. We'll see how it goes. I'm hoping to get some ready by the holidays. Bring it up to meet with family. As it stands right now, I think one of the batches is likely to reach about 11% alcohol. The other one's possibly going to reach 12 to 13. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, National Novel Writing Month. As I am somewhat notorious for doing, I have overcomplicated my other story idea. Whoop. Camera twitch, because I bumped the cord. So what I'm looking at doing is the where's my list of National Novel Writing Month ideas? Probably should have brought that up before I started filming tonight, huh? That would almost pretend to suggest that I know what I'm doing. Come on, just open it. Don't argue with me. Nope, that's new strange ideas. Nanowrimo 2020. Okay, so that's not where I made my notes, so is it? Well, let's see. If I just made I need to sort my stuff out better than that. No. Okay, so we had. So I had the idea of doing one of the Ghostbuster ideas. So we were looking at rehashing, reworking some of the ideas behind pop culture earlier in the year. And one of the ones that we looked at was doing Ghostbusters. And part of that was looking at the idea of one of the stories we looked at was discovering, or a group of people who are into sort of like psychic research. Sorry to talk with my mouth full. Sorry. I don't think I was really ready tonight. Basically, the psychic researchers who uncover people with mental abilities and are the Ghostbusters to those people. And the thing I struggle with this one makes it interesting to me is the idea that you're dealing with people. Like with Ghostbusters, it's ghosts. They're not people. So, like, you're busting monsters. So, you encounter ghosting, and it's a problem that you fix. The problem with a story about people who develop unusual abilities is they're people. And their abilities that they get are just an extension of who they are. So the idea of hunting them down, capturing them, or destroying them is not a positive mindset. Okay, so there we go. That's the file I was looking for. So there are a couple of stories that take that type of concept and explore it, but it always, you have like X-Men, which starts from the premise that you have a psychically empowered individual who's feared and hated and sometimes hunted by the rest of the world. But the stories are always told from the perspective of the person with abilities and who's alienated and persecuted. We almost never tell the story from the other side. And rightly so. We'd like to think culturally we're beyond the idea of persecuting and killing people simply for being different. But there are a few ways to tell this type of story. The trick is to be able to paint a human character as a scary monster. Now, if you look at other science fiction and pop culture stories, you can look at concepts of like The Fly or things like that, where the main character doesn't start out as a monstrous being. But as things progress, they just become something more than they are. But there's a part of me that wants to play around a little bit with both parts of that story. Because, I mean, it's not too hard to imagine telling this story from the perspective of the X-Men style character who's persecuted. But could we tell the story of a monster hunter hunting these new kinds of human monsters and make the character sympathetic to the reader. And by that I mean, like, if you're reading this story, the goal is to make you want that monster caught and either imprisoned or killed. And you might be able to see where I'm kind of going with this. The idea of telling a story from both the hunted and the hunter's perspective. And I've always had this sort of idea for years of doing a sort of a trick story. When I was younger, I studied psychology in college. And one of the things we had happen in one of our classes was they'd hand out a flyer with a description of somebody with their actions and thought processes all described out. And then we're supposed to discuss our thoughts about this character. But the teacher's playing a nasty little trick. See, the teacher gave half the class a piece of paper that describes somebody who's really into collecting stamps. They really like stamps. They can tell you some of the most amazing stamps in their collection. This weird one from this area, why this misprint is more valuable, all those kinds of details. And they have arranged their stamps in a collection to display their favorite pieces. And they'll talk to anybody about them if you give them even the slightest chance. What are your thoughts on that character? That's a very juicy pear. Sorry. So what are the thoughts on that character? Most people don't really have an issue with that. The other half of the class got the same character name, address, and a lot of the details are exactly the same. The biggest difference is he collects empty toilet paper tubes. And he can tell you all about his favorite ones, what are the most unusual kinds he has in his collection, ones that he's gotten from other places around the world. So when he went traveling, he found some in a location. And he collects it. He has a large collection and he displays his favorites in a certain area. So the story is almost entirely the same, except for that one detail change. Stamps versus toilet paper tubes. But here's the thing. The entire class, they don't know that two different letters have gone out to them. They all think they're talking about the same character because his name's the same, his address is the same. And, as a side note here, I will say, I got the one with the toilet paper tubes. And somebody else got, a bunch of the other people got the stamps, a bunch of the other people got the toilet paper tube ones. And the thing that tripped it up was you had the standard people. I think I read Peter Pan, actually. I did a review of it a couple months back, maybe a year ago at this point. But anyway, the psychological study had two teams essentially form unknowingly within the workspace. One's arguing, this person is perfectly stable. There's nothing wrong with this. He shouldn't be referred to us for psychological analysis. And the other half is like, no, this guy's bonkers. The problem was I got the paper that said he was collecting toilet paper tubes. And I was arguing he's not unstable. Yeah, it's a weird fascination, but so what? But at any rate, that's a side note. The main point here is that given this story concept of this person who's collecting either stamps or toilet paper tubes, you could get people who thought they were talking about the same story when they were talking to each other, but are completely puzzled by how you can believe that that's okay or that that's crazy. They just can't figure out how the other person sees it differently than them because they've been given a different story. One detail has changed. And so, like, I mean, I've played games like that before where you goof around with that kind of thing. But the thing that really that brings to mind for me is I've always sort of wanted to do the same kind of thing in a novel. And by this, I mean, like, not just like a novel from one perspective and a different novel from a different perspective. I mean, full on publish a book with two different versions of it, but let nobody know that there are two different versions of it. So that you go to the bookstore, you buy this book, you read this book, and then you go to talk to other people who read this book, and you're just absolutely flabbergasted that people could think that way. How could you believe that this is okay? And just leave it until somebody figures it out. I have always wanted to play that game. And I'm wondering if this is the type of story that I could do for this. The idea that starting a novel with basically the same story of people with abilities and people who hunt people with abilities. But one story you tell from the perspective of the hunter and do it sympathetically. And then in the other version of the story, you do it from the hunted and you do it sympathetically. And you just, same title, same book cover. You print a run of one and you print a run of the other one and you box them together and you ship them to the bookstore. You could literally go to the bookstore and it would be like a random draw. Which one did you get? But you don't know that there's more than one type. I think that would be amazing amounts of fun. I think the hardest problem of doing that would be in order to sell your books, there's sort of like a filtering process. So like they won't let they won't let me write a book called The Lord of the Rings. I can't write a book called The Lord of the Rings. I just can't do that. They would never let it get published to a shelf. Even more so, two books at the exact same time with the exact same title, with the exact same author and the exact same cover art, they would never let that happen. And I think there are a couple other areas where it would be harder to do. I think one of the things is like to have that conversation happen between two readers where one of them is talking about the book and the other one is talking about the book, but they don't realize they're talking about different books. It's harder to do because if we're going to be discussing a story with psychic researchers that find out that people are displaying powers in the world and they have to, get these people before they're a danger to society. You have that kind of story. The main character in that story is the psychic hunters. But if you're telling the story of a psychic who's being hunted, then the main character is the hunted character. And so I can immediately see somebody sitting down and go, the main character was just such a relatable character. And, in that case, it's like a character. Well, then you're talking about the prey. If you say the characters or the team, that's plural. That's the other story. So I feel like there's got to be you got to play with it just right to make that work out right. I'm not sure I've got that worked out yet, but I kind of still want to play with it a little bit. So it's sort of like, I think we have to go with, well, I was going to say we kind of have to go with a third person. They did this, they did that, he did that, she did that, they all did this. I can see that working for a single person story. Well, I mean, it's not really a single person story at that point. It's a lot of stories together. And if you do the third person, you can refer to the prey and the predator over and over again. And it doesn't matter who's the focus of that book. You can do it for both styles of book. But I feel like, see, it is a little bit easier to do it that way. You could potentially do first person, where I did this and I did that. But then you further increase the risk of them figuring out the game, because the main character and the perspective character are the same. So the story's from the perspective of the hunter. The story's from the perspective of the hunted. If it's from the perspective of either of those two, those characters are the main character. But in a third person, you can tell the story from no perspective of any character in the playing field. Third person omniscient is basically a narrator driven story. Basically, an outside observer is telling you what they're seeing. And in that case, there is no perspective character to help you understand who the main character is. And if you play that right, your characters, you can almost feel like in certain stories that there's more than one main character, and you can almost pick a side. So I'm trying to think of a book that does that. I mean, Lord of the Rings has more than one main character. I'm not sure they do it in such a way that you don't get a sense for the side that you're on. They never do anything to the degree of like you ever question whether or not the characters are on the wrong side. I suppose you could say something like that about Blade Runner, where you're not sure who the right character is. Is Decker hunting down replicants wrong? Or is the replicants, who are essentially murderers, but doing so for their own protection, are they wrong? So, like, which one is the right side there? You have a story where that they do that, but it's done, if I remember correctly, if Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep is sort of done as a neo-noir, hard-boiled detective style story. And that's usually done from a first person's perspective, where they're narrating their own back scenes. So what we're looking at sort of here is you'd have to play it really tricky. Whoops, geez, sorry. You'd have to play it really tricky. You'd have to set it up so that you follow each half of the story, the prey and the predator. You follow both sides of that story. But you really you you ring this you don't do it from the perspective of either of them. You just third person each story, but the way you talk about it makes it clear which side the reader's supposed to take. Oh, that would be truly tricky, but it would be worth it. You're basically retelling the story two different ways. Basically you're writing the story twice. So I would have to pick one way to write it the first time, and then in a rewrite, I would go back over and write it a different way. Now, how would I differentiate them enough that I could get them both out there at the same time? Oh, I'm going to have to ask other people on the National Novel Writing Forum what they think about this idea. I don't want to ask too many because it spoils the idea. I almost didn't want to mention it on here tonight because I feel like it spoils the idea. But I guess one of the benefits of having a small following is it's not too likely that it'll ruin it for the rest of the audience. And potentially, if we give it enough time, we're likely to all forget what I have actually done and be caught by surprise when we figure it out again. But in the meantime, I think what I have to do is I think actually what makes more sense is to write a middle ground story. So this is definitely a story that's designed to be rewritten. So what I'll have to do is look at the story as a neutral ground storytelling. So the first version, nobody's going to be right and nobody's going to be wrong. This is just going to be an unfortunate story for all involved. It's only in later rewrites where I'll take that story and rewrite it so that one definitely seems to be right and the other seems to be wrong. And then flip it where I do this, or another rewrite where the other side is right and the other side is wrong. And that's going to rely on the cohesiveness of the moral gray that is the middle ground story that I write now. Now I've got to figure out how to release it. And once I do that, how to get enough attention to get people. Well, I could probably give out or price it in such a way that I can get public discussion of the book going. Because immediately we know if you start this story out with the intent that people have entirely different books but don't know it, then it sets up that perfect kind of heated debate. But in this case, it's not like a political debate or like the recent stuff that we've gone through as a country or a world. It's not that kind of thing where it degrades into hostility and side taking and bitterness. This is fictional, and it's play to a certain degree. And so I do feel like there can be sort of a playful back and forth about it. And then I kind of want to. I want to be there when the first person cracks it, when they figure out, wait a minute, no, 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 wait a minute. I want to see that so bad. That would be super fun. Oh, I have had this idea for years. Even before I was doing National Novel Writing Month, I had this idea for a story idea where you write it two different ways and don't tell anybody that they're getting either of one way or the other. Oh, man. I think I even mentioned it. Like, can you imagine if I think when I first mentioned it to somebody years ago, I was just starting from the idea of like, if you were to watch Star Wars and you just change one detail, like the original Star Wars movie, say like Obi-Wan Kenobi dies in one version and doesn't in the other, and you showed it in a theater. I mean, if you have him die like he did in the movie we know, that's one thing. And then in another one, he gets aboard their Millennium Falcon with them and manages to escape with them. And then he takes a background role for the rest of the movie and the later episodes. Instead of being visited by his ghost, you have him actually advising in person. You could totally do the original trilogy with just that little tweak and not change much of the course of events for everybody else. And so that's the way I sort of originally had pitched some of this idea. And just the idea that one little difference was different and people could be talking about the movie. And like the first one would be like, it was so sad when they fled the Death Star in that sort of sad moment, and people are like, what are you talking about? Why is that a sad moment? And like they just don't get it, and they just can't understand where the other person's coming from. It's a little different because in what I'm doing now, it's more like definitely picking a side in a fight. And the information you use to decide which side makes the most sense to pick is really something that should stick in your craw. Like, you're talking about hunting other human beings. Like, you better make sure you're making the right pick. But I'm going to confound that pick. I'm going to make it sympathetic and then totally not sympathetic for different readers. But it'll be interesting to see if I can get that to take off enough that people would talk about it and enjoy doing that to their friends and family. Like book club meetings, just a book club meeting would be hilarious to watch after that. I wonder if I could touch base with some of the other people at VidCon in coming years to see if I could rope them into doing a book club discussion of the book and see if they can get what they caught. Like, how long does it take them? Because, I mean, the short story we had in psych class, it was easy enough because it wasn't deeply detailed. It talked about a few things. It was like a third of a page. It was just a couple paragraphs. So you don't have a lot of information that could be seen differently. Like, it took us a while, and I think I was the one, if I remember correctly, in class who said, "What's wrong with collecting toilet paper tubes?" And everybody's like, "What? what do you mean toilet paper tubes? And then other people go like, yeah, toilet paper tubes. What were you talking about? And that's when it cracked for everybody else. And I went, oh, that's what we're doing. We're playing that game. I had forgotten all about that kind of concept until that class had brought it back up. But the more detail we have, the harder it is to bury that lead. I mean, you'd have to really write it well enough in both forms that the scenes are the same, the events are the same, the commentary is pretty much always the same, the dialogue is always the same. Nobody dies who doesn't die in the other version. Everybody gets the same injuries, the same events happen to them, but the meaning of those events is made different by the version you're reading. And you'd have to do it through your language choice. You couldn't tell the reader it was a horrible experience. You can't say that. You have to make them feel that it was a horrible experience by using roughly the same discussion as you would in the other story. Like, nobody's going to be quoting the non-dialogue base. So, like, characters will say the same things to each other. They will perform the same actions. It's through voice and mood of the writer that we can set the frame for reference differently. Oh, it'll be a real trick. So what I need to do for this start is, I mean, I'm making this, again, like I said at the beginning, I'm making this way more complicated than it needs to be just for the sheer fun of this play. Because I'm going to need to write the middle ground and then red and blue tinge them. That'll be tricky. I got to play a just morally ambivalent gray. And because of the nature of the story we're telling, you have to do, like, even the good guys have to do wrong things. But you have to be able to feel like you can excuse it in the good guys, but not the bad guys. And that's really where all the difference is going to happen. You're going to have that gray story that goes right down the middle. So you write this morally ambivalent, morally gray story right down the middle, and then you tint it for one side or the other during the course of the story through really your choice of words and your pacing and your sense of phrasing that lets you communicate that this is only happening because they didn't have another choice. Yes, it's a horrible thing that they're doing, or maybe not a horrible thing, but it's a thing that under most circumstances we should see as negative that they're doing. But they only did it because the other side was such a danger. Like, you have to, I'm trying to think of, like, the visual equivalent would be like two people seeing each other in a dark alley and assuming the other one's dangerous to them. Like, it's all a matter of perspective. Like, they think the way they do because from their perspective, the other person looks dangerous and hostile. But when you really look at it, it's two people who are moderately dangerous to each other, but don't have to be, reacting the way they react because they're afraid of the other person. Oh man, that's a heck of a trick. I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. So I have to write very carefully to write morally gray right down the middle. So both sides are going to feel sort of anti-hero. So like if you look at certain comic books and things like that, movies, we'll sometimes see a character like Deadpool or Punisher, where they are killers. They're mercenary, they're brutal, but they do what they do to stop other monsters. And you mostly side with them because they are doing, yes, they're doing wrong, but they're doing wrong for the right reasons. Whereas the usual model of a hero of a story is to be like, this person is doing what's right even when it's hard. No, this person needs to do wrong, but they're doing the wrong because it's the best way to stop a worse wrong. Sometimes you need a monster to kill other monsters. Sometimes you need a fire to fight a fire. I always hated that phrase because that doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, so I think that's really what I'm trying to do, is write a story of two anti-hero stories playing against each other. And then at a certain point, I have to break it out and through storytelling tricks, make each side of that look good and then make them look bad. It's a fun project to do. It's also way more complicated a project than I should really pick for a National Novel Writing Month. But let's see what we can do with it. We're almost at 45 minutes. I think that's probably a good place to cut it for the night. I think my next night on is Sunday night, because today's Thursday, right? I hope tonight's Thursday. Oh, technically it's Friday now, yes. So I'm like, it's Friday? How did that happen? Yes, because we just passed midnight. Well, 30 minutes ago. East Coast time. So I will catch you on Sunday night, perhaps with some updates about my writing, possibly with some updates about how my mead is brewing. We'll see how that goes. It's 2020. It might turn into a mutagen and kill us all. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Until Sunday, thanks for joining me for tonight, and take care and have a wonderful evening. Hey, this is probably the first one in the last week where I didn't give you nightmares, right? No horrific monsters or return from the dead to avenge your cannibalism. Alrighty. I will catch you Sunday.